Welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Christina Evans. Again, we've been following this major breaking news update that we just got moments ago. We now know that a second judge has officially denied Diddy's bail in this sex trafficking case. Again, I want to show you the outside of the courthouse where we're waiting for Diddy's team to come out, or prosecutors to possibly come out and talk to reporters who are stationed outside of that New York courtroom after the judge just handed down this ruling. Now, we do have a lot more updates and even more questions that are going to be coming over the next few hours to see what this does mean for the music mogul. So I now want to bring into the conversation Neama Rahmani. He's a legal analyst who's been following this case very closely. Neama, first of all, were you surprised to see that this judge has decided to now deny bail for the second time for Diddy?
I wasn't surprised, Christina, and this is why. There's really two types of federal judges in criminal cases. There's a magistrate judge and there's the district judge. The district judge is a higher judge. He is going to be the judge that's actually presiding over Diddy's trial. But what a magistrate judge will do is make a recommendation when it comes to bond. And when criminal defendants appeal to that higher judge, it's not necessarily going to a higher court like the Second Circuit Court of Appeal. It's going to the judge who's actually going to hear the case. And that judge has to review the bail determination de novo. That's a Latin term that essentially means anew or for the first time. So they can't give any precedential impact to the lower judge's ruling. Now, why did the judge, in this case, Judge Carter, who's the district judge, decide to detain Diddy without bond? There's really two reasons why pretrial detention is appropriate. One, if an individual is a risk of flight, and two, if they're a danger to the community. Obviously, we're seeing the images, the drawings. There's no cameras allowed in federal court or even state courts in New York for that matter. So let's start with the risk of flight. I thought the defense did a very good job of saying that Diddy surrendered his passport to his lawyers. He told prosecutors where he would be whenever he left the state, if he's going from Los Angeles to Miami to Wyoming, wherever. They also put forward a very creative, I would say, bail package. Obviously, we all heard about the $50 million that would be secured by Diddy's Miami home. But they also offered the following. They offered a private FEMA security from Sage Consultants, which are all former law enforcement, that would actually be at Diddy's home and monitoring everyone who comes in or out. They would have a guest log. Diddy wouldn't be allowed to have a phone or any internet access. They were actually offered to have cameras rolling 24/7 throughout the home, and they would provide that to the court. But ultimately, none of that mattered, and this is why. The judge ruled that Diddy was a danger to the community. And I think that ruling was based on two very important pieces of evidence. The first is the 2016 video of Diddy beating Cassie at the Intercontinental Hotel here in Los Angeles. We've all seen it. Very disturbing video. And the defense tried to argue that it was essentially a lover's quarrel, and there was a third person who was actually in the hotel room that evening. They were participating in one of these alleged freak-offs, and it was a jealous rage. But the judge wasn't having it. I mean, this was something that was very violent. Certainly, the judge wasn't buying that this was a one-off, because if you look at the allegations in the complaint, Diddy is alleged to have been violent and threatened others as well. But I think this is an important piece of evidence as well. I know we're waiting for the lawyers, so I want to make sure we get all this out. Diddy contacted some of the victims and some of the witnesses in the case after he became aware of the criminal investigation, maybe as early as January. That is considered improper. It may be obstruction of justice. It may be considered witness tampering. And there's at least one instance where phone records show that he contacted or tried to contact a witness more than 100 times. And I think, Christina, that's the reason why the judge denied bail in this case.
I mean, I think that was the thing that a lot of us saw that stuck out. Over 100 times trying to contact a witness after you know the federal government is already looking into you. Can you sort of explain maybe what those calls might have been like from the prosecutor's side, saying, hey, this is definitely improper for him to be doing this now knowing that he is under investigation?
And apparently some of those calls may have been recorded. So this is why it's improper. We know the defense's really only defense in this case is that this sexual conduct was consensual. When you're talking about rape, sexual assault, sex trafficking, the government has to prove force, fraud, or some other type of duress or coercion. So even if it's a freak off, if it's consenting sexual contact between adults, no force, no money being exchanged, there's no commercial activity, that may be okay. So if Diddy's defending the case, he can only defend it in a couple of ways. You can say that the contact never happened. Well, that's not going to work because there's videos and apparently a lot of witnesses to these freak offs. The second you could say it wasn't me. Again, not going to work in this case. So his real only legal defense here is that the contact, what happened, the sexual activity, was consensual. And apparently, according to the government, Christina, Diddy was trying to convince the victims, the witnesses in this case, to tell people that this was all consensual. So that's considered to be improper. That's considered tampering or maybe impeding an investigation or dissuading a witness, either offering them something of value or even threatening them. And I think that's the thing the judge took issue with. And he asked the defense point blank, well, if your client knew he was under investigation, why is he contacting the witnesses? And I don't think the defense had a good answer for that.
And moving forward, we know the defense has a long road ahead of them. What maybe is their process to try to combat what the prosecution is going to be throwing at them? Because the prosecution has already said, hey, we have at least 50 witnesses that are willing to take the stand in this case, or maybe are going to be subpoenaed to take the stand in this case. So the prosecution's path forward, what is the defense path forward for the next few months as Diddy now remains behind bars?
Prosecution is going to focus on two important categories of evidence. The first is the video, and that is by far and away the most powerful evidence because, Christina, people can lie, witnesses can lie, but video doesn't lie. And that video was so powerful. Let's not forget from the time Cassie first filed her lawsuit in November 2023 to the time that that video was released in May, for 6 months, despite the raids in LA and Miami, Diddy, through his lawyers, denied everything. He said this was all a money grab by people that were trying to shake him down and extort him and get money. Well, guess what? After that video became public, all of a sudden, Diddy gives this sort of half-hearted apology, said he's trying to get therapy and work on himself because he knows, and his lawyers and his PR team know, that that video speaks for itself. But there's more video than that, apparently. And we know that because if you believe Cassie's civil complaint, and if you listen to U.S. Attorney Damian Williams yesterday, he said there's other videos, and it could be the cameras throughout Diddy's homes. We know he reportedly had hidden cameras, but importantly, Cassie said that Diddy videotaped these sex acts. So if there's video recordings of the freak offs, that's going to be incredibly powerful evidence for prosecutors and for the jurors to consider. The other category of evidence, of course, is the witness testimony. And it could be victims, and some of which have filed civil lawsuits. We know there's at least 8 or 9 civil lawsuits against Diddy. And I know Diddy's legal team is going to argue that this is just all about money and it's all fabricated. And sometimes jurors have a tough time believing the testimony of one victim. They could say it's a he said, she said type situation. But when victim after victim comes forward and tells the same story of physical and sexual violence, that's very hard for a defense team, even if you have the best defense lawyers in the world, to overcome because one victim may lie, but multiple victims telling the same story usually do not. So the defense is really going to have its hands full in this case.
And lastly, I want to just touch on one more point with the witnesses. You said that now that we know Diddy is locked up, do we feel that more people are going to come forward with their stories? And does this still open the door for more charges? Of course, we know he's facing multiple and sex trafficking and kidnapping, but potentially there could be more potentially here if more witnesses decide that they want to make their voices heard.
Absolutely. We knew that Cassie was essentially a Me Too type witness, right? She was Diddy's girlfriend of more than a decade when she came forward. That opened the floodgates. But there have to be individuals that are concerned about their safety. I mean, Diddy reportedly threaten many of them and sometimes coerce them by, holding their music career over their head. But now that Diddy is going to be locked up pending trial, and we know that trial is going to be months, maybe a year or more away, that may encourage others to come forward. They may feel safe. And it's not just additional charges against Diddy. There might be other victims. Only one is identified with any real specificity in the indictment. We talked about gun charges. There was a number of AR-15s that had an obliterated serial number that could be added on. But really, what I'm looking for is charges against other people. I don't believe for a second that it was just Diddy that participated in these sex acts. There are a lot of rumors that are floating out there. I don't want to name any names, but if you were a celebrity here in Hollywood and you participated in these freak offs, whether it was in Miami or New York or LA, and these were victims who were being forced to do this against their will, you should be very afraid. You should have a lawyer. And I hope and expect those individuals will be charged and brought to justice. And we don't have another Jeff Epstein type situation where the victims of these horrific sex crimes are left without getting the justice that they deserve.
And Neema, thank you. I do want to turn your attention to your screen here. You can see that was Diddy's family walking out of the courthouse. We saw his sons, Christian Combs and Justin Combs, just take their walk out of the courthouse and down the steps, presumably leaving. None of them stepped up to that microphone where this podium is placed outside of the courthouse, as we're anticipating and hoping for to hear from either prosecutors or the defense team step up to the mic following this bail hearing where he was denied bail. But again, his family just came out of the courthouse. And Neema, since I have you, I do want to ask you a question about the family. They've been in court showing their support. Does this sometimes impact a judge's decision to deny bail or to allow bail in cases like this? But as we can see, it was still denied.
It does affect a judge's decision. And oftentimes in federal cases, when there's bail, it's a little different than state court. State court, you'll have a bail bondsman or bondsperson. He or she will post the amount of the bond. The defendant might post a percentage, 5 to 10%. But really, it's up to the bondsman to ensure that the defendant makes his or her appearances in court. But that's not how it works in the federal system. You'll have a bond that's secured by property, but oftentimes you'll have a signature bond and you'll need what's called sureties. Those are responsible adults, oftentimes family members, that the court will interview and they'll actually sign and say, Your Honor, we're going to put ourselves out there and we're going to ensure that this individual, a friend, a family member, makes his appearances in court. So that's something that's certainly very important. A judge does consider when deciding whether bail is appropriate or not. And it can also affect jurors during the criminal trial. I mean, criminal defendants that have no family support, especially when you're talking about sex crimes, that's really a red flag. And even though jurors are supposed to base the case and their decision solely on the facts and the law and the witness testimony, jurors are ordinary people. And that's something that they think about. Why doesn't this individual have any family support?
Certainly. And we, of course, know that other than just being a music mogul, Diddy is also a father, a brother. He's always talked about his relationship as well with his mom. So very strong family ties there for Diddy. We'll continue to watch how this case is unfolding. Neama Rahmani giving us just a breakdown of what happened today in the courtroom and what is potentially to come. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Christina. I'm sure we'll be talking about this real soon.
I'm certain that we will.